The end of the year is finally here, so like many other YouTubers, I've decided to rank 10 games I played in 2017. I was going to make a list like this last year for 2016, but I got lazy and didn't go through with it. I'm not going to miss out on this time, however, since I'm quite passionate to talk about the games I played this year. Keep in mind that the games on this list don't necessarily have to be from 2017. They can be from whatever time, as long as I played them for the first time this year. I only played 14 games, which is much less compared to previous years, and that's because I've been consumed by television recently. But the convenient thing is that I have exactly 10 contestants with my one game per series rule in mind. I will of course mention the other 4 games when I get to the franchises they're from. Alright, enough chat, let's rank.
Jump up in the air, jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
Placed at the bottom of my list is Guerrilla Games' Killzone II, and while it's probably a good game like the fans and critics can tell you, I personally couldn't stand playing it. I'm not a fan of first-person shooters in general, and this one was beyond boring. All I did was walk slowly and shoot with bad aiming with bland visuals that only worsened my experience. I did only play 10 minutes of it, but I had a feeling the game would mostly remain the same, which is usually the case with the repetitive FPS genre, so I didn't bother continuing it. Guerrilla Games made an excellent game this year that made me check out Killzone, so I was quite disappointed when I didn't end up enjoying it. Again, it's probably a good game objectively, it's just not my cup of tea.
Time to jump up in the air, jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
When I watched the first gameplay trailer for Ukulele, I was really interested in it, because it looked like a great new 3D platformer that gaming lacks nowadays. Because of this, it became the first and so far the only game I've ever backed up on Kickstarter, so I was indeed very excited for the game, and while I found it enjoyable, it didn't really live up to its expectations, hence why it's so low on the list. Some of its gameplay mechanics are awful, and while I admire that these game design veterans tried, it's still just a watered down version of Banjo Kazooie, which is one of the best collectathons out there. Ukulele on the other hand is just a gimmicky game with huge but boring worlds. I still had a decent time with it though, and if anything, it most certainly screams charm, which is always nice in my book. Plus, my name's in the credits, so that must count for something.
It's time to jump up in the air, jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
The latest Uncharted game is only at number 8 on my list, mainly because I've only played about an hour of it, and so far, not much has happened really, so I think number 8 is a suitable position. It seemingly contains the basic principles of an Uncharted game, like the fun adventurous gameplay, captivating storytelling, and of course, beautiful graphics. However, it doesn't have Nate, which doesn't ruin the game, but he's the very face of the series, so removing him feels wrong, especially since he's my favorite character. With that said, I do like Chloe, so it's good that she was chosen to be the protagonist instead of some dull character like Nadine. Oh wait, she's the second protagonist. Oh well, Chloe is still a great choice, and this game might turn Nadine into a better character, so I can't judge her fully until I've completed the game. But for now, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy is near the bottom of my list.
It's time to jump up in the air, jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
I played many Crash Bandicoot games this year, but the N-Sane trilogy definitely takes the cake. That's because it contains 3 games that are remakes of older games that haven't aged too well. These remakes are quite faithful to the originals and definitely makes them more accessible today, since when I played the old versions even before I got this trilogy, they felt quite awkward to play. Speaking of the old versions, I had already played Warped a decade ago, but this year I finally played the remaining Crash games made by Naughty Dog. They were fairly enjoyable, except for the original, but again, the remakes in the N-Sane trilogy are a lot more comfortable to play, especially the original, which is the only one I've finished so far, but I'm close to finishing Cortex Strikes Back as well, which is probably my favorite of the bunch because of the expanded moveset and since I barely played the Warped remake.
It's time to jump up in the air, jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
Like with The Lost Legacy, the same situation applies to South Park: The Fractured But Whole, as I've only played a portion of the game, which is why it's not higher on the list. However, what I did play of it was really fun, and the excellent comedy is the main reason why it's above Uncharted. I was immediately thrown off after breaking the Rubik's Cube, which apparently destroyed the whole universe, which made me laugh really hard, especially since it cut to the credits right afterwards. I could mention tons of other hilarious moments, but the wonderful title says it all, which is the funniest title for a game since Quest for Booty. The RPG elements have become quite sophisticated compared to the ones in Stick of Truth, which is nice. The genre change is also nice, even though I prefer fantasy over superheroes, but this allows for different jokes and combat features. Besides, Cartman is the coon, which is as good as it gets, really.
It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
Since I brought up that Banjo Kazooie is much better than Ukulele, I might have given you the impression that I played Banjo before lately, but in actuality, Yuka is what made me get into Kazooie. I already knew Ukulele was the spiritual successor to Banjo and that it was going to be very similar, but after having played Kazooie, I can definitely confirm that they're almost identical and the original handled this formula much better, hence why it's a lot higher on the list. The worlds are nowhere as big and empty as Ukuleles, preventing them from becoming repetitive, and the game has a lot of inventive power-ups that are used frequently to overcome obstacles. The repetitive nature of collectathons is my main problem with the genre as a whole, so I'm glad Banjo Kazooie breaks that trend with a fun experience that always feels fresh. I unfortunately didn't finish the game since I eventually got distracted by TV, but as you can tell, I did really enjoy what I played of it.
It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
Aside from Crash, Spyro is the only other franchise I played multiple games of in 2017, which is fitting since they're the most comparable gaming mascots, but the difference is that I only played 2 Spyro games as opposed to 4, technically 6 Crash games. When I played the original Spyro this year, I was surprised by how well it has aged as it controls really well. It's a linear collectathon, which is good because the more open-ended ones can become repetitive quickly, which I've mentioned several times now. It helps that the levels are really fun too. I had played the sequel Ripto's Rage before, but it just didn't do it for me since I wasn't in the mood to play it. I was just rushing through it and disregarding all the minigames, which makes for a worse experience. After I finished the first Spyro game, I replayed Ripto's Rage, this time completing all the minigames, which made for a much better experience. Ripto's Rage is actually my favorite game in the series now, but since I played it in 2014, I can't put it on the list, so I'll just go with Spyro the Dragon. I did play Year of the Dragon as well, but I haven't played too much of it and the additional characters aren't all that fun to play as, at least not compared to Spyro. I will finish it eventually of course, since Spyro is truly an Insomniac gem.
It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
I don't own a Nintendo Switch, so you won't see any other Nintendo games on this list, but I do own the Wii U version of Breath of the Wild. It was a must-buy, so of course I got it on the console I actually own, and I doubt the Switch version is much better anyway. Okay, so the Wii U does have frame rate issues, but it doesn't really ruin the experience. I've played 4 Zelda games in the past, and Wind Waker has been the only one I've truly enjoyed, but Breath of the Wild manages to come close. It's an open-world Zelda game much like the Wind Waker, minus all the sailing, and the map is huge. Though even despite the map's enormous size, exploring it rarely ever gets dull since there's so much to do and explore in it. It's also varied in terms of visuals, and the similar looking shrines have varied obstacles, which makes them feel fresh. After spending maybe 50 hours in this game, I stopped playing it for quite a while when I got into one of my new favorite TV shows, but I went back to the game late December and finished it just as the new year hit. The ending wasn't really that good, but then again, this game is more about the journey and there are so many interesting stories I can tell from my experiences during it. Otherwise, the game is just super fun, so it more than deserves the number 3 spot. I wouldn't call it the best game of the year, however, let alone the best game of all time, but it's definitely an experience that'll leave you breathless.
It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
Horizon Zero Dawn was the game I had been the most excited for since when it was revealed at E3 2015, and boy did it deliver, even more than I anticipated. I've already made a review of it where you can find out all the details of why I love this game, but I'll briefly summarize why I love it for you who don't want to watch that video. It has one of the best storylines out of any game I've ever played, if not the best, and even though storytelling is heavily emphasized, it doesn't diminish the gameplay any bit, which is important in order to keep a gameplay lover like me entertained. It's the reason why I find it much better than any game that focuses solely on story, because the gameplay is usually dull because of it. I absolutely adore the concept of animal machines being hunted by tribesmen in an apocalyptic world. It's one of the most interesting premises I know of. Plus, the graphics are some of the best of this generation and the soundtrack is also quite beautiful. So good in fact that I can listen to it on its own, which isn't the case with most atmospheric soundtracks. I'm not entirely certain, but I think I spent a total of 70 hours in Breath of the Wild, but with Horizon Zero Dawn I have almost spent 140 hours in it, as I've completed the new game plus on Ultra Hard, and I haven't even played the Frozen Wilds DLC yet. If you watched my review on this game, you probably thought it would be number 1 on this list, and I'm just as surprised as you guys that it isn't. I really wanted it to be because of how amazing it is, and because the list would both start and end with the games made by Guerrilla, which would have been more special. However, my number 1 choice was just too damn good to pass up, and it might not be a better game objectively, but in terms of enjoyment, it blows Horizon Zero Dawn out of the water.
It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away.
I just have to say this right now. A Hat in Time is the most enjoyable new IP I've played in over a decade, and that might seem like a very odd claim for such a silly looking game, but please hear me out. The graphics aren't the best since it's an indie game and all, but the visuals and environmental designs are great. Plus, the soundtrack is great too, especially against this boss fight specifically, where the track reminds me of Undertale music. Speaking of bosses, they're really varied and unique and always feel epic as hell to fight against. I have to admit that I was disappointed by Horizon Zero Dawn's final boss, since I expected something much grander in scale, but A Hat in Time didn't have this issue at all, as the final boss is just as fantastic as the others. Seriously, this game has my favorite boss lineup out of any game. The movement is made for smooth traversal, as Hat Kid moves extremely fast and fluid, and the gameplay has a lot of varied scenarios, as well as power-ups that contribute to its vast replay value. Not to mention that the game is very long. Okay, it might be short if you ignore all the collectibles, but the gameplay is just too fun to ignore everything. My playthrough took 20 hours and the next almost 12, and I'm currently on my 3rd because it's a game I can't shelve. What I just said doesn't make sense since it was only released digitally. I just wanted that sentence to rhyme, so please don't judge me. The main selling point for this game is definitely its charm, and the writing is absolutely spectacular, with humor that heavily reminds me of Rayman 3 and the PS2 versions of RNC that are some of the funniest games to me. Okay, I seriously need to stop rhyming now. I was quite surprised with the writing, since it's actually pretty dark for such an innocent looking game, and all of the jokes hit, not to mention that characters like the Snatcher and especially the Conductor are hilarious as peck. Speaking of darkness, there's even a mission in the game that makes the Canaran sections from Rayman 3 look like a joke in comparison. Seriously, this shit kept me on edge the entire time. A Hat in Time is truly a gem of this generation, and I hope its developers Gears for Breakfast will make more excellent games like this in the future, hopefully with better graphics too. Not only is A Hat in Time my favorite game of 2017, but it's also in my top 10 games in general, even with multiple games per series allowed. This Kickstarter game is what Ukulele should have been, and I wish I had supported A Hat in Time instead, so I could see my name in the credits of this wonderful beauty. Alright, that was my ranking of the 10 games I played this year. As you can see, it was quite a good year for video games, as the list mainly consisted of games from 2017, and while most of them were low on the list, that's mostly because I haven't spent much time with them yet. Besides, this year sure as hell beats 2016, and the top 3 are some of my favorite games ever. Man, 2018 sure has a lot to live up to now. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully you'll see me next time.